Hello everybody. Salut and welcome to another French GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. So in this particular video tutorial, we're going to look at a common area, a very common area of difficulty actually for French GCSE or iGCSE students, and that is the imperfect tense and the perfect tense. So we're going to go through these in detail, both the usage firstly, and then how to form each of those tenses before giving you a chance to practice as well. So, just to introduce myself quickly first, I'm Dhananjay Talwar, and I studied French and Italian for my MA at the University of Cambridge. I graduated back in 2015, and I've been an educator since that time. I'm really passionate about languages and language learning, as you may well be able to tell soon. But I've learned more than 20 languages at different levels, and that includes at least 9 of them to fluency. So it's something that I really enjoy doing, and a real hobby of mine. I love inspiring other students as well, and giving them efficient ways of learning languages and helping them to reach their goals, like their target grades. And I've done that with over 500 students so far, helping them achieve or exceed their target grade for French GCSE or iGCSE while a full-time tutor. I've helped with other languages too. I've tutored 8 of them so far for GCSE or iGCSE, and some of those above that level too. So we're going to look quickly here at the French GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. So there are 4 of them as of August 2025 for GCSE French and 2 for iGCSE French. There are differences, of course, or there can be some important differences between different exam boards. But today, in this particular video, we're of course looking at a commonly difficult aspect of French grammar, and that will be the same regardless of your exam board, of the exact exam board that you are studying. So that means that this video and the content in this video will be relevant for everyone, which is good news. So let's start to look at the imperfect tense and the perfect tense. So this is a common area of difficulty for many students. So if you're struggling with this as a student, you should know that you're not alone. That can help take some of the pressure off as well. These tenses, of course, do not function exactly as they do in English. And so many students will struggle, particularly to differentiate between them. So to know when to use the imperfect tense and when to use the perfect tense. Students can sometimes, know how to form them, but they may not know exactly when to use each one. So the imperfect and perfect tenses are the 2 most common past tenses. And knowing when to use each of them is, of course, a key part of French GCSE and iGCSE, particularly for, say, higher tier students if you're aiming for higher grades, say grades 7 to 9, of course. But even if you're aiming at lower grades, this is still an important part of French GCSE or iGCSE. Okay, so here are the uses of the imperfect tense and the perfect tense. So the imperfect tense, firstly, is used for continuous or repeated actions in the past. That's the key. The fact that the action that's referred to must have been repeated in the past. It can also be used for more background information. For example, in this example, when I was little, I used to play football every day, which in French would be quand j'étais petit, or petite if it's a girl talking, je jouais au foot tous les jours. So those 2 verbs in italics, j'étais and je jouais, those are both in the imperfect tense. And that is because we're talking about an action that happened very regularly in the past. And I've put in bold here actually the time phrase every day, which really helps us to identify that it's the imperfect tense that we have to use for these verbs, because every day indicates clearly that this must be a repeated action in the past. If you did something every single day in the past, then it is by definition repeated or regular, and therefore you would have to use the imperfect tense. So that is the key, really. The repetition or regularity of the action in the past. The perfect tense, on the other hand, is used for one-off actions in the past. And usually these actions happened at a very specific point in time. So you should be able to pinpoint where that action started, when that action started exactly. Uh, so, for example, in the sentence, yesterday I played football with my friends. Hier, j'ai joué au foot avec mes amis. J'ai joué is in the perfect tense. Yeah, the perfect tense is used over there. Because this is a one-off action in the past. Many people may think to themselves, you know what? It's very unlikely that this person just played football once in their lifetime, which is true. But within this particular sentence, there's no actual indication that it happened again or more than once. The sentence itself doesn't indicate this being anything more than a one-off action in the past, and that's why the perfect tense is used instead of the imperfect tense. So the regularity of the action in the past is the main thing to remember and to look at when deciding between the imperfect and the perfect tenses. Yeah, other things that students often get confused by, such as how long ago the action actually took place, are not relevant. Yeah, we can see the perfect tense is used here when you're talking about something that happened yesterday. It could be the same for the imperfect tense as well. Okay, so now we're going to look at the formation. This will take a little bit longer. We're going to go through this fairly thoroughly so that you're able to, form both of these tenses as well as knowing exactly when to use them. So the imperfect tense, which is l'imparfait in French, that translates into English as I was something ing or I used to something. For example, I was doing or I used to do. I was going or I used to go, for instance. Those are the two most common translations of the imperfect tense. You do get instances in French, for example, when they can be used. The imperfect and perfect tense could both be used, or they can be somewhat interchangeable as well, although not the majority of the time. The imperfect tense is certainly easier to form as well, largely because there are far fewer irregular forms. There's only one real irregular verb in the imperfect tense, as you'll see, whereas in the perfect tense or passé composé, there are many more. So here are the steps to follow to form the imperfect tense. The stem, so the stem is the first part of the word. Most verb tenses in French and in quite a few other languages too will consist of a stem and then, which is the first part of the word, and then endings, which you add on at the end of that stem. So the stem for the imperfect tense, the first part, comes from the nous form of the present tense of the verb, and then you remove the ons ending. So for parler, for example, the nous form of the present tense of the verb is nous parlons, and then you take off the ons ending, which leaves you with parle, P-A-R-L, which is your stem for the imperfect tense of the verb parler, to speak. And then you would add the correct ending of the imperfect tense. You'd have to put it in the right person, of course, which I will show you on the next slide. So these are the endings for the imperfect tense. Many of them are pronounced very similarly. So ion, ie. You'll notice that 4 of them are actually pronounced the same way in French. And the nous and vous form are slightly different in their pronunciation. It's very important to know the endings by heart. Those endings remain the same for every single verb in the imperfect tense without exception. And I've given an example below. So using the verb parler, meaning to speak, to form the stem, you look at the nous form of the present tense of the verb, which is nous parlons, meaning we speak or we are speaking. Take off the ons ending, and that gives you the stem for the imperfect, which is parle. And then you would add on the correct ending, the appropriate ending, depending on which person you need. And you would also stick on in front the subject pronoun as well. So, for example, if you were to say I was speaking or I used to speak, that would be je parlais in French, just to give one example. You can see the full conjugation in the imperfect tense of the verb parler here. Je parlais, tu parlais, il ou elle ou on parlait, nous parlions, vous parliez, il ou elle parlait. So a nice regular verb to use as an example. And all regular verbs which is the vast, vast, vast majority of the verbs in the French language in the imperfect tense, they'll all follow this same standard pattern. There is one irregularity, however. There's one verb that just has to be different and not follow the standard pattern, and that is the most common verb in the language, which is être, meaning to be. But the good news is that that's the only really irregular verb in the imperfect tense, which makes the imperfect tense quite a bit easier to memorize. So être in the imperfect tense becomes j'étais, tu étais, il, elle, on était, nous étions, vous étiez, il ou elle était. So you'll notice the endings remain the same. Again, there's no change with them. The stem, however, does change quite a bit to become E acute T. Okay, moving on now to the perfect tense, or le passé composé in French, and how to form that. So this is a fair bit harder than the imperfect tense for most students because of the number of irregular verbs, more than anything. The perfect tense translates into English as I somethinged or I have somethinged. So, yeah, in English we'd normally use that ending ed to signify something in the perfect tense. For example, I did or I have done. I went or I have gone. I saw or I have seen, and so on. Many other examples possible as well. So for the perfect tense, you'd normally use one of those two translations when translating it from French to English. Generally, the first one, I did, I went, I saw, and so on, that tends to be the most common translation. Now, the perfect tense is formed using an auxiliary verb, which is either avoir or être, in the present tense, followed by the past participle. So, unlike the imperfect tense and most other tenses in French, there are two parts to the perfect tense. And both parts are required, of course, to be able to form it correctly. Okay, so we're starting off here with the auxiliary verbs. This is just to illustrate the auxiliary verbs themselves. Every verb in the perfect tense will take one specific auxiliary verb. So either avoir or être. Avoir, of course, means to have. Être normally means to be, although they don't have those meanings when they're used as auxiliary verbs in the perfect tense because they're used just to form the perfect tense itself. So just for creation of the tense. But you should definitely know all of the forms of avoir and être in the present tense for French GCSE or iGCSE. They're the two most common verbs in French. Avoir is j'ai, tu as, il, elle, on a, nous avons, vous avez, il ou elle ont. And être is je suis, tu es, il, elle, on est, nous sommes, vous êtes, il ou elle sont. So we will use these present tense forms to create the perfect tense. Right. So once you've got the auxiliary verb in the appropriate form, depending on the person that you need in the present tense, you would stick the past participle after that to complete the formation of the perfect tense. There are many irregular past participles, but there are plenty of regular ones as well. So most past participles, the regular ones, will all follow this standard pattern. So for ER verbs, verbs that end in ER in the infinitive, such as parler, the past participle will be formed by removing that ER at the end of the infinitive and putting E acute instead. So parler, as you can see here, becomes parler. The past participle is parler. You can see that it ends in an E acute instead of ER, although the pronunciation in this particular case doesn't change. RE verbs, so verbs ending in RE in the infinitive, you take off the RE and replace that instead with a U. So attendre, meaning to wait, the past participle is attendu, for example. And of course, all regular RE verbs will have the same pattern. For IR verbs, all of those verbs which have IR at the end of the infinitive, as long as they're regular ones, they'll form their past participle by taking off the IR at the end of the infinitive and putting an I instead. So finir, to finish, the past participle becomes fini. Okay, so those are the formations of regular past participles. There are, however, unfortunately, many irregular past participles as well, not just a few. And that's what generally makes the perfect tense harder to form and more difficult, more onerous to memorize too. So if there are verbs that take the auxiliary être, you have to remember to make the subject and the past participle agree as well. I will show you some of the irregular past participles, I believe, as well. So if you're using the auxiliary verb être, every verb will take either avoir or être as an auxiliary. That simply depends on the main verb that you're putting into the perfect tense. And you simply have to memorize. There are some techniques to do that too. Which verbs take avoir in the perfect tense and which ones take être. So if the auxiliary verb être is used, you have to remember to make the subject and past participle agree. This can take practice because it's easy to forget. But if the subject is feminine, you have to add an e to the end of the past participle to show that. And if the subject is plural, you must add s to the end of the past participle to show that too. If the subject is feminine and plural, you have to add es at the end of the past participle to reflect both of those things. So that is something to remember. And these are examples of regular verbs in the perfect tense. So starting off on the left with parler, to speak, which would become j'ai parlé, tu as parlé, ils, elles ont à parler, nous avons parlé, vous avez parlé, ils ou elles ont parlé. And then aller, to go. This is an example of a verb that takes the auxiliary être instead of the auxiliary avoir. And you can see that the past participle would have to agree with the subject. That's why there are e's in brackets or s's as well, because if the subject is feminine, you'd have to add an e at the end. And if the subject's plural, you must add s as well. So that would become je suis allé, tu es allé, ils ou elles est allé, nous sommes allés, vous êtes allés, ils ou elles sont allés. Okay, here is a chance to test yourself with a few questions on the imperfect tense and the perfect tense. This may not be that easy, depending on your level of understanding of this topic area. So feel free to look back at your notes. If you've taken notes on the previous slides, that can be used to help you perhaps as well. Up to you exactly how you want to handle it. So in English, if we were to say, I saw my friends 2 days ago, how would you render that in French? Would you use the imperfect tense or the perfect tense? That's the first thing I would think of, actually, whether to use the imperfect tense or the perfect tense. Once you've decided on that, then I would translate that. So put that into the correct tense, actually form it, and then translate the rest of the sentence apart from the verb as well. Okay, let me give a bit of time to think through this. Okay, I'm going to show you the answer now. So this one is the perfect tense. So j'ai vu mes amis il y a 2 jours. Il y a 2 jours means 2 days ago. Il y a plus a period of time means ago in French. But the verb, more importantly, goes in the perfect tense because this is a one-off action in the past. There's no indication at all that this action happened regularly in the past or even more than once. So it becomes j'ai vu, which is, the formation of voir in the perfect tense. Okay, next one. The English is we used to go to the cinema often. Yeah, that should be to the cinema rather than the cinema. So again, think through what tense to put the verb in. Once you've decided that, then put the verb in that tense and then translate the rest of the sentence too. Give you a little bit of time to think through all of that. Okay, let me show you the answer now. This one is the imperfect tense. The reason why is because it's a regular or repeated action in the past. Often is the word that also reveals that it should be a regular or repeated action in the past, or makes it clearer that the imperfect tense is more appropriate to use. So the translation is nous allions au cinéma souvent. Nous allions souvent au cinéma in French. Nous allions, that's the imperfect tense from the verb aller, to go. One more then, which is slightly trickier. The English for this is I was doing my homework when my mum came in. So there's 2 verbs here, I was doing, and my mum came in or my mum came in. So you've got to think through each of those and whether to use the imperfect or the perfect tense for each, then conjugate them appropriately and translate the rest of the sentence. So let me give a bit of time to think over that again. This is a slightly longer sentence and a bit more challenging as well. Let me give a little bit extra time just because this one is harder. Okay, let's go through this then. So let me reveal the answer. This sentence combines both tenses. So you've got both the imperfect tense and the perfect tense in there. So the answer would be Je faisais mes devoirs quand ma mère est entrée. So the first verb, I was doing, that goes in the imperfect tense because it's a more continuous thing. It's happening in a more repeated, ongoing way, the homework. It's not something that happened at one specific point of time. The person speaking would have been doing their homework continuously for some time. That's why it's the imperfect tense of the verb faire, which becomes je faisais. The second verb, on the other hand, is in the perfect tense because my mum came in. That there would have been a very specific moment in time when the person's mum came into the room. So it's something that happened at a very specific point in time, not something that was repeated or ongoing at all in the past. And therefore, the perfect tense has to be used instead. The verb to come in French is entrer, which takes the auxiliary être, actually. And so in the perfect tense, that becomes ma mère est entrée. And you have to stick an extra E on the end of the past participle too to show it agrees with the subject, ma mère, which is feminine singular. So there are various ways to remember which verbs take the auxiliary verb être in the passé composé or perfect tense. A mnemonic called Dr. Mrs. Vandertramp, or even just Mrs. Vandertramp, where every single letter stands for a different verb, is probably the most useful method and one that's really commonly used by students. But if you're learning the perfect tense, then make sure to learn and go through all of the irregular past participles as well, because there are very many of those. Okay, so now there's just about time for a quick quiz to test your knowledge of the imperfect and perfect tenses. Okay, question one. So starting off fairly straightforward, probably. Which tense has more irregular verbs? Is it the imperfect tense or the perfect tense? Have a think about this. Okay, and let me reveal the answer then. This one is the perfect tense. That certainly has more verbs with irregular verb forms, which take longer to memorize. So do make sure that you do commit extra time to that when you're learning the perfect tense. Okay, question two then. True or false? The imperfect tense is used for regular or repeated actions in the past. Is it true or is it false? I'll give you a few seconds to think through this. Okay, let me show the answer then. So this is definitely true. It can also be used for background information, although most commonly for regular repeated actions that happened in the past and not one-off actions. One-off actions would go in the perfect tense instead. Question three, then, true or false? If a verb takes the auxiliary verb être in the perfect tense, then the past participle must always agree with the subject. Is that true or is that false? Let me give you some time to think over that, to look at it. Okay, and I'm going to show you the answer. So this one is also true. You have to add E on the end of the past participle if the subject is feminine, and an S on the end of the past participle if the subject is plural. And if the subject is feminine plural, you add ES on the end of the past participle. So please remember this. Every time you use the auxiliary verb être in the perfect tense, you must check for the agreement between the subject and the past participle, which does take practice. And lastly, number four, how can you tell which verbs take être as an auxiliary in the perfect tense? I mentioned this right towards the end. let me show you the answer for this one as well. So, to some extent, these do have to be memorized, but there are various ways to remember them. A lot of students are told that it's verbs to do with motion, which take the auxiliary verb être instead of the auxiliary verb avoir. Avoir is actually a more common auxiliary overall. To some extent, that's true, but certainly not every verb that takes the auxiliary être is related to movement or motion. It can be a useful general rule or rule of thumb perhaps, but not a hard and fast rule at all. Many students instead use the mnemonic, which they memorize, Mrs. Van der Tramp or Dr. Mrs. Van der Tramp, which can be a really useful and efficient way, I believe, to memorize which verbs take the auxiliary être in the perfect tense. Okay, if you've got any questions on any of that, or you'd like to know about more personalized help, which I do offer too, you can contact me by email, through Facebook, or Instagram. I post every day on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, sharing my love of languages with the world, of course, inspiring people to learn languages, informing them of the benefits of this and how they can do that effectively and in fun ways. And I post a lot about GCSE and iGCSE too. So a lot of content on how to maximize your marks, how to prepare, make a revision plan, and so on. I have many resources and free resources too available for French GCSE or iGCSE, and a Facebook group that I run with many tips for French GCSE and iGCSE students and their parents. That's completely free to join as well. I do one-to-one classes, group classes, courses, and a lot more as well. So don't hesitate to get in touch if you'd like to know more.